Development Committee of the Metropolitan Council. I'm Chair Robert Lilligren and joined by a quorum of the committee. Committee members, we have an agenda before us. I know that there's an interest by Councilmember Chambliss, Councilmember Johnson, to reorder the agenda. Councilmember Chambliss, do you want to?
Yes, I move that we amend non-consent item number 4, 2023-48 to number 1 on the non-consent agenda.
Sounds good. And rather than a motion, I'm just going to take that as
okay.
a recommendation, and we'll move that if there's no objection. So we'll move item 4 to the top of the non-consent business agenda. Without objection, any other changes? Hearing none, if there's no objection, we then have an agenda before us. Great. We'll move on to approval of the Community Development Committee minutes from January 17th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion, additions, corrections? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. We'll move on to our consent business agenda. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. So we'll move on to our non-consent business item, and we'll move to item 2023-48. It's the 2023 Livable Communities Act Fund Distribution Plan, and that will be presented by Sarah Berke. Welcome.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. We need a different PowerPoint. Is that here? No, okay, sure. All right, well, while we get the PowerPoint ready, hello, Chair Lilligren and council members. I'm Sarah Berke. I'm the Senior Manager for Housing and Livable Communities. So as we get the PowerPoint up, we're here to discuss the 2023 Livable Communities Act Fund Distribution Plan. The reason we're here today is that the Livable Communities Act requires that the council prepare an annual plan for distribution of livable communities funds based on program criteria that are established by the council, and those must be consistent with and promote the purposes of the statute and the Regional Development Guide. So following our discussion last month on January 17th, we're now bringing the fund distribution plan for your final consideration and approval. And if it is approved, the plan will then go to the full council at the February 22nd meeting. So staff is preparing to publish program materials and begin outreach to potential applicants very soon after that council action. So today our agenda for this presentation is to look at the funding sources and funding availability that's proposed for each LCA program, to review the scoring framework and the minor updates that staff proposed this year to it, to follow up on discussion about outreach efforts and evaluation, which we had last month, and then ask for your action to approve the plan. So LCA programs, as you know, include several grant programs, each with 1 or 2 rounds each year, and they each operate on similar timelines throughout the year under the rubric of 3 main funds: the Tax-Based Revitalization Account, or TBRA, Livable Communities Demonstration Account, LCDA, and the Local Housing Incentive Account, LHIA. So the dates shown in the presentation are tentative timelines for bringing the funding recommendations for each program to this committee later this year. These are all approximate and subject to change, but once the council approves the plan that we're discussing today, tentatively later in February, staff will begin the process of encouraging applications for each of these programs. As we discussed last time, each year we assess funding availability by looking at both the base revenue and the program reserves. Base revenues are calculated based on specifications in statute, and reserves are in some cases restricted to specific programs, whereas others are unrestricted within the overall Livable Communities Act fund. So table 2 on page 3 of your business item has more details about the recommended allocation of a portion of the reserves into each fund this year. And we're proposing, staff is recommending a total of $5.5 million for TBRA, $16.6 million for LCDA and TOD, and $5.4 million for LHIA in 2023. So this is a total of up to $27.5 million in grants that could be awarded in this solicitation cycle. I will note that last year the council identified $2 million in special initiatives funding for LHIA, which increased that program's budget last year. This is not available this year in the council's budget, and so it's a small decline in our overall LHIA funding availability this year. $1 million fewer than last year approximately. And the scoring framework we've been using for the last couple of years really focuses on aligning the program criteria with council goals as expressed by your policy direction and in the regional development guide as well as in statute, really focusing on outcomes of the project as well as how projects come together and who is represented in shaping each project. Most of the scoring changes we presented last month, there's a detailed red line showing them, but most of them are really around clarifying some language, reducing redundancy, and adopting more of a plain language approach to make sure that everything is understandable to a lay audience and not just to technical experts. There is one additional small change proposed in the draft today that was not included last month. It was just an oversight. So for LCDA and TOD development, staff have updated the recommended scoring criteria to remove a project team criterion that proved very difficult to score in reality and was a little redundant about encouraging partnerships between government, for-profit, and nonprofit sectors. So that has the effect of slightly reducing the project team score component for that program. Otherwise, no other differences from what we previously discussed. And last month, I know this committee was very interested in better understanding our outreach and evaluation plans for LCA programs. So we will share separately with you a very detailed calendar of outreach events that staff are planning. As the dates for each program get finalized, there will be a series of webinars, outreach events, resources available online. And staff will also set some goals to conduct targeted and individualized outreach to communities who haven't applied recently or to those who haven't been successful in recent years. And then we continue a series of evaluation efforts that have been in part in progress since 2021 as we get more and more years of data to understand how our current scoring criteria framework is working. Key questions this year for evaluation are, how well are LCA programs actually meeting the statutory purpose and the council's policy? What does equitable distribution of LCA grant resources look like along multiple dimensions? And then what role do the LCA programs play in the regional community development financing ecosystem? And so we invite your continued feedback and discussion on those. We intend to bring this overall framework back to the CDC for a mid-year check-in and allow you to have a discussion about how the program is going, about the evaluation questions and progress toward answering them. And we believe that'll be helpful to do also alongside other regional development guide conversations about council priorities. So for today, the proposed action is that the committee take on this proposal, that the Metropolitan Council CDC would approve the 2023 Livable Communities Act Fund Distribution Plan as shown in the attachments you have. Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Ms. Berke, for the presentation and for your work on this. I have one quick question. You talked about the scoring change around partnerships, so it's difficult to score. So what's the impact of that change? Or is there sort of like a winner or a loser, or who benefits, who doesn't benefit from that change?
I don't think there's a clear winner or loser in that.
Okay.
It has the effect of just slightly, so for example, in LCDA development, TOD, on that scoring table, there's the total of 62 points. There used to be 66 points, I believe. Okay. And those 4 points were taken away from the project team section because, again, it just didn't really score differently than the overall project team section. It seemed like it was a little redundant.
Thank you. Thanks. committee members, discussion on that report or the recommendation? Yeah, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks for the presentation. Just curious, you mentioned a detailed calendar is on its way. When do you envision some of these outreach activities taking place? Understanding that
Yeah.
everything's still in the works, so we won't hold you to it, but just in the spring, next month, or
Yeah,
later in the summer?
starting as soon as the end of this month or the beginning of next month, we would do, outreach related to the release of the funding availability. And yeah, it's a pretty detailed list for each program. There are different webinars scheduled, so it gets to be quite a few throughout the year and a pretty full calendar, and not something that stops in March either, but just that it would start in March.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Further discussion on this report?
Go ahead, you can go first.
Councilmember Johnson, then Councilmember Wolf.
And hopefully you can remind me, because I can't remember, of the number of cities that could be eligible to participate in livable communities. We know that dropped off in recent years, probably because we were thinking of COVID. Do you know how many we've got signed up and where that compares to maybe our high water mark or just another comparable point in time in the past? How are we trending is what I'm looking for.
Thanks, Ms. Berke.
I know that we currently have 76 communities participating in Livable Communities Act programs, and I believe it was around 100 or so in the past.
Something, yeah.
Lisa might know more, yeah. But I think the number of active applicants is probably not very different from past decades.
Did you want to say something? Yeah, Director Barajas has a comment as well.
And Mr. Chair, I would add, in the past, I think we were near 100, 96, 97. There were a number of communities who were enrolled previously that didn't have affordable housing need. Afton, for example, as one of those, and a handful of other similarly situated communities they can enroll. I think we had maybe a half dozen that we were like, what should your affordable housing need negotiated goal be, since it wasn't part of their plan? But Sarah and I actually were just talking about some past participants that would be likely candidates for re-enrollment that haven't enrolled yet. That would be a targeted focus for outreach this year as well.
Mr. Chair, just to
Councilmember
follow up,
Johnson.
and remind me again, enrollment happens when, in the timing and cycle, because there's a cycle for that, and I just need to be reminded of that.
Director Barajas.
Mr. Chair, Council Member, we do re-enrollment once every 10 years following generally the biggest completion of the comprehensive planning cycle. So in this calendar year, or I'm sorry, in this cycle, we did re-enrollment in kind of leading up to 2020 and 2021. So like you said, we had overlapped with COVID in that a bit as well in that cycle. But most of our conversations around what re-enrollment would look like, what the negotiated goal process would look like, were happening in 2019.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, if I may.
Councilmember Johnson.
So when would re-enrollment then open up again?
Mr. Chair.
2029?
Communities can actually enroll at any point in the 10-year cycle. I don't know if you remember, but we did bring on communities in the past, like Shakopee, kind of midpoint cycle, maybe one or two, a handful every couple of years here. The large re-enrollment would happen in the conversations in 2029 and into 2030. Hard numbers to say out loud, they're right around the corner, but yes, 29 and 30 after largely the completion of the next round of basically the 2050 comprehensive plans.
And then, Mr. Chair, if I may, just final question on this. And I know we were going to have, there's going to be an effort to get back to cities to make sure that they would re-enroll, to encourage them to do so, but also to find out why some haven't been re-enrolling, and maybe this was discussed at the last CDC meeting. I'm sorry, I couldn't be there. But have we picked up on any trends, or are there things the cities are saying that, we aren't participating because X, Y, or Z? Is there anything that
Berke or
we're
Director
finding out
Barajas?
from communities?
Mr. Chair, I don't know that we have any trends. They're kind of unique. There's also been a variety of staff changes amongst communities over the last couple of years. Actually, a lot of staff change, moving from one community to another. And actually just a whole lot of new folks in leadership roles in some communities that are targets of ours to re-enroll and reinitiate those conversations. I don't know, Sarah, if you have additional.
Ms. Berke, anything to add?
Sure, Chair Lilligren and all, staff let me know that they did ask that question in a survey that just went out, and is, an active survey right now. So we'll get some results and we may find out some more information about reasons for not enrolling. And then each year there is a November 15th deadline for enrollment. So if someone wants to enroll to be eligible for LCA programs next year, they have until, if I understand correctly, November 15th of this year.
And then just, Mr. Chair, so we are in a phase right now where we're gathering information and we'll be working to, encourage some of those that aren't participating to get in yet this year for next year's funding.
That is correct.
Just wanted to make sure. And, for me, I'm just trying to understand too, our city, what it is that cities are not participating, why aren't they participating? And I can come up with all kinds of things, but it doesn't matter because we need to hear what they say, right? So I'll be really looking forward to that. I can know anecdotally from some of my communities that are participating and do participate and have submitted and have received funding or haven't. I just know that there are times where, it is difficult for some of the cities that might not be as big as others with a full staff on board to do some of the work that's required. And I just don't want there to be a chilling effect either where, they've put all in on something over and over and they're not, they're not getting there and they're seeing where they're landing with scoring too. So just watching that really closely, and that's kind of the lens I'm bringing to some of my thoughts today. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. No, thank you, Councilmember Johnson. You sound kind of like me today, so I don't know if it's the freeze thaw.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
what I
getting
think is
over
the
it.
yeah.
I've taken so many COVID tests, so it's
Okay.
not
Yeah,
that.
no, I get
Somewhere
it,
between
yeah.
cold and sinus infection, I've sort of settled on.
My
Or I
head
just want to
feels
be a
like
radio DJ, I'm not sure.
Life in Minnesota. Cool. Further discussion on this report, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I asked staff to run some numbers on how the funding has gone and the spread around the region. Because like Dakota County CDA does a frequent analysis of, is the money getting concentrated that they're spending on affordable housing developments within their area to make sure that it gets spread around and everybody has a fair shot. We haven't done a lot of that. We get maps with dots on them, and we could do a lot of comparing core cities versus suburban cities, but the suburban cities are a very large, very diverse area. And so I asked staff to put together a spreadsheet, and they sent it out to all of you. I hope you had a chance to look at it. But they broke down the proportion of awarded dollars for the first part of the program, 1996 through 2010, and then 2011 to 2022. And there was a big change in 2011 because that's when we added the TOD program. So the balance of funding available sort of had a significant change in that time, because previously we had the policy of trying not to have more than 40% for Minneapolis and St. Paul and the rest be for the suburbs, but the TOD program didn't have that. That has a $2 million per city. So if you have a $5 million program, you could theoretically have 80% for Minneapolis and St. Paul. And that does sometimes happen, but other times it's other cities that are on the receiving, get substantial grants there. But they're all generally cities that are farther in. They're not a lot of TOD grants outside of the core cities and the first ring suburbs. So when I looked at it, I was looking at Dakota County and Minneapolis numbers, because Dakota County has about the same population as Minneapolis does. So I could get sort of an apples to apples sort of comparison. And in the first part of the program, Dakota County got 6.8% of the dollars from all programs, and Minneapolis got 18.1% of the dollars for all programs. But for the second part with TOD and scoring changes, Dakota County dropped to 3.8%, and Minneapolis is up to 38.9%. So it's a tenfold difference geographically for the same population. And this is a property tax-based program, so it seems like having it spread out around the whole region should be a goal, but it really hasn't been so far in the program. And there's also local levies for affordable housing that go on, and I asked for information about that from Dakota County CDA, and they had information from 2018 levies. And Dakota County and Hennepin County have substantial levies, over $7 million. There's smaller levies from some of the cities and other counties, but the local effort for Dakota County is substantial compared to most of the other counties except for Hennepin County, but yet our participation in that, their local participation is great, then they pay into us, but they don't get a proportional amount of money back. And they're also struggling with Minnesota Housing Finance Agency because they used to get gap funding for their affordable housing projects from MHFA, and 10 years ago, they decided that Dakota County didn't need any gap funding. They had enough from their property tax levy and whatnot, so they just stopped providing gap funding for Dakota County projects. And then now, within the last couple of years, they've started to claw back the gap funding that they were given, because they were 30-year loans, and if something remains affordable after that 30-year period, the loan is either forgiven or extended generally. But instead of doing that, MHFA is now clawing back those loans. And so they're having to take their affordable housing dollars and pay them back to MHFA. So there's lots and lots of local efforts to do affordable housing, but nobody else is participating besides the Dakota County taxpayers. And we're taking their money, giving it to other places and not giving it back. So that's really concerning to me. And I know staff is saying, well, let's just, do this one more year, get some more data and do some outreach. But that's $27 million going out the door, again, unfairly, which is a big concern to me. I don't know if we have time to make any changes, but I'm just really, I'm not going to vote for it as it is now. That's a given, but I'm trying to express to the rest of the group that there are some serious problems there. And in the past, the outreach has always been go to these communities and say, well, yeah, you have a chance, put in an application, as if they're the problem. But maybe our lack of cultural competency of what things are like in some of the outer communities is a problem, rather than just those cities being a problem. Maybe our process is a problem. Maybe we need to look at allocating some of these funds directly to the different HRAs and let them do it. Because when we do our transit funding, we're always complaining that we need reliable funding in order to make solid plans. LCDA and whatnot are reliable funding for Minneapolis, but they're not reliable funding for other communities. They can put in a lot of effort, maybe get funded, maybe not get funded, but a lot of times it's not worth the staff time and the money to put together a proposal if you don't think you really have a chance. So that's my 2 cents, and I'll shut up and let other people talk.
No, thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate you raising the point. And did you share that Dakota County specific data that you just referenced? I know we got the spreadsheet in response to your
No, I
question.
just shared the spreadsheet. I've got other data that shows the levy from all counties. I've got a distribution of where the money went for all counties. I even have demographic data on the workforce housing in Dakota County. And that was another thing that came up when I was talking with them. We keep talking about that you have to have fair housing marketing plans and be reaching out to underserved populations. But if Dakota County actually was reaching out to underserved populations in their workforce housing, they'd have to reach out to white people because they're very much underrepresented. They've got 61% Black. They've got 6% that didn't say, but 23% that are white. I mean, they've done their job of reaching out and making sure that everybody has a chance, but yet the criteria for our projects acts like that's a problem. And I guess, at what point does it cease to be a problem?
Thank you. Thanks. Further discussion or comment, Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Wolf, for bringing this forward. I think tangentially, seeing the last round, especially of funding that came through, and again, the committee did a very good job evaluating against the scoring matrix that we put together. But I too am just becoming concerned around, especially, the community outreach and trying to reach the underrepresented group in the process. I know that in the communities I represent and in the affordable developments that are built, there is great diversity in those developments. And so I don't know what we need them to be doing or if there's something that's deficient in what they're doing, but when these developments do go forward, such as Cranberry Ridge for one, and I was up in Maple Grove at another one not too long ago, it is predominantly people of color that are very grateful for being there. And so I really want to be serving our goal of equity, but I don't want the criteria to be such that, maybe we need more input from the cities or, I don't know, I need to better understand that because I don't want there to be a chilling effect because I saw some good suburban developments come through and because of that scoring criteria, they fell behind. And if I, and I might be mistaken, but I don't believe I am, but I just want to raise the point too that when we were going through criteria on that last round, we had leftover money from, I believe it was from the LCDA, but then there were also the TOD grants were oversubscribed. So we moved money from LCDA into TOD. And my preference would be that we leave it in LCDA and we get that back into the communities that might not have hit the marks with their scoring. But to move it into TOD where there is no percentage for Minneapolis and St. Paul versus the suburbs, I just feel like, well, I don't want to overstate, but to me it a bit violates the LCDA share of who gets the money when then we move it into a program that has no percentages of where that money should go, meaning a maximum for Minneapolis and St. Paul. Now let me tell you, I was born and raised in St. Paul. Then I moved to Minneapolis on the north side. I love the core cities. I'm not trying to make this about an us-them thing, but I also know how hard it is, to get more housing choices in the suburbs. And I've heard, not from this committee, but just generally that the suburbs really don't want that kind of development. That is not true either. So I just want to make sure that there's geography, equity and geography here too, and we're not doing anything. The intentions are always good here, not disputing that. But I just want to make sure that the criteria that we have, that we are proposing to move forward, doesn't put a chilling effect or take money that really should stay for the LCDA purposes where there's a maximum for Minneapolis and St. Paul and keep those funds in reserve for the suburbs or other communities. And I don't like it being moved into TOD. Not that those projects weren't worthy either. They were worthy. We don't have money to do everything we need to do. But I don't want there to become growing disparities between the suburbs, suburban edge, and communities that are working really hard but just don't have the expertise really at their little city hall or whatever it may be. And so they're in that group that isn't participating. Or we have cities that have participated, but as Councilmember Wolf said, are feeling like, well, this is getting harder and harder. And I will also just say one last thing, and I've said this before. Because there's such great need at 30% AMI, that is where the focus is. It is with Minnesota Housing and us. I get it, Hennepin County, I get it. Because the need is so great. It just breaks my heart, though, that there are 50% projects out there, AMI projects out there, and 80% projects that are really having a hard time competing. And the longer they sit in the queue, the more expensive those projects get, and the harder they are to see them past the finish line. We all know that. And so, it's just trying to, thread that needle so carefully to find the right balance. And so I'm just, appreciating what Councilmember Wolf has raised, and it's kind of, I think, illuminating some of the tangential concerns that I've had here within the last year. So I just wanted to leave that with everyone tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Wolf.
I would just clarify, I'm not dogging out Minneapolis and St. Paul. I mean, I lived in Minneapolis too, but just talking about everybody being treated the same and not some communities having preference over other communities.
Well, appreciate it. And thank you. And the conversation about geographic equity, I think, is one that's really going to elevate as we look at the fund distribution plans going forward, for sure. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I think it's good to have council members digging into the data and looking at opportunities to utilize the money and the funds. One thing I look at as far as adding the TOD funding and not having the restrictions that we have for Minneapolis and St. Paul, I'm still seeing with the distribution of funds that we're sending out, cities, suburban cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul cities applying and getting awarded. We made some changes where we knew that we were going to have to look at it for longer than a short period of time. You don't want to make changes and then not give it sufficient time to be evaluated, and I'm glad that we are going to be doing that by doing the outreach to these communities, asking them if they have not applied, what the reasons are, and then also looking at where people are applying and succeeding, where people are applying and not succeeding, and looking at how we can maximize the dollars for our livable communities goals, which are not to be considered, oppressive. Those dollars are out there to help us meet our equity goals and our Thrive goals to have more livable communities. And it looks like for our first year after, we did get cities apply, both Minneapolis, St. Paul, and suburban cities. I've also seen that many cities had community development plans that they've had to scrap because of the changes in the economic environment, in the housing and the commercial and retail environment. They may have had plans where it's no longer financially feasible, so they had to put some of their development plans on hold. So I think we need to recognize all of those factors and give it some time in terms of how we're evaluating our programs and look into what happens next year, and having mid-year reviews sounds like a good approach to me.
Thank you, Councilmember. Just a question, this might be for Director Barajas as well, and Councilmember Johnson brought up the fact that when we reallocate the funds and if we put them into TOD programs, they have fewer restrictions than the statutory restrictions, but nothing in this the Livable Communities Act distribution fund plan is sort of presupposing reallocation, right? That's a one-off, or that's one-off, decision that we make. Correct?
Mr. Chair, in statute within LCDA, there isn't a limitation in statute. It's a limitation that you can apply in the fund distribution plan itself. Right now, I think it's at $2 million per core community for TOD. If you wanted to change that, you certainly could, and make it similar to the other LCDA programs. TBRA is the only one that has that limitation within statute about oversubscription and limitation on the core communities.
Thank you, thanks, that's helpful. And then one other thing, and Councilmember Wolf, I'll recognize in just a second, is this geographic distribution conversation, I think, is one that we should have. And, I've already talked to staff a little about, is there weighting and scoring that can happen more geographically? The one thing I would caution us against, and Councilmember Wolf, you raised point that Minneapolis and Dakota County have comparable populations. Dakota County is 10 times the size and area. And so I just want us to really caution against using any sort of one criteria, population. That's what, that's kind of what we're gonna wait on or something. And I think the nature of communities like that are very, very different. And so as we strive for what that apples to apples is, I would suggest that we don't oversimplify the data. So, thanks. Councilmember Wolf.
No, I forgot what I was going to
I'm sure it was great.
listening so intently to what you said.
Okay, all right. Thank you. So we have the next bite at this apple, right? We've had this conversation about geographic equity. I think it's a fair conversation to continue, although I think at this point in the approval process of the distribution plan, it's late. And, we can tee that up and have that conversation, but I don't hear anyone proposing any changes to this distribution plan, right?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, really appreciate those comments, thank you. And I think to Reva's points too, and I know we've got all the data for those who have applied and haven't received funding, and maybe they came back, but if there's a way to pull that and give us those examples, I mean, we all have them anecdotally in our head as they're coming through approvals, but I really do appreciate having good data in front of us to see, who has and has not, and maybe who hasn't come back, and then we can dig further into the whys and the why nots. And I would only say, to your point, Mr. Chair, which is good, that, we're kind of late in the process on where we're at on this, and I do appreciate Councilmember Chambliss's point about giving things some time so that we're not doing any kind of quick response to a point here or there without really having a time frame to review it. I mean, again, I apologize, I could not be here a couple of weeks ago when this went to our first meeting on this, but that was our first time to take a look at what we're going to be doing. So it is a bit late in the process, but at what point do we get to shape that process, if not sooner than today or a couple weeks ago? So not disagreeing with you, totally appreciate that, but maybe, and I have had to miss some housing work groups, so if that was brought forward there, I appreciate that, although that's not certainly the full complement of people on the CDC. So I'm just recognizing the good comments that were made and trying to sort my own vote out on this one. Did you get enough time to remember what you wanted to say?
So I have in queue Councilmember Wolf, Councilmember Chambliss, and Councilmember Lindstrom, right? So Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one of the other factors we need to look at is how much is that community doing with their money versus other people's money. I know several years ago I looked at affordable housing construction. We had a spreadsheet by community that said, how many of their affordable housing projects got Livable Communities funding or not. And there are some communities that only do affordable housing construction when they get a LCDA grant. And there are other communities that are doing a lot on their own with their own money. And I think we need to acknowledge that in our funding and partner with the people that are doing that work rather than just, just ignore them and they can do their own thing and we'll only focus on the communities that keep applying over and over again.
Councilmember, I think your point is an excellent one, in that the contribution of private development and private investment in affordable housing is a huge consideration. It's an argument that I've made for decades since my time on the Minneapolis City Council. I think it's underappreciated when we look at the full affordable housing investment mix in our region. And so if that is a criteria that we want to introduce, I think it would take some, well, it's different, right, than we've done in the past. So it would take some innovation, Councilmember Wolf.
I'm not talking about private money. I'm talking about like HRA levies and, local money that's government, tax-based kind of money that's coming in, that they're doing their part. Are we partnering with them? And now I forgot my other thing again. I had another one in my head.
Did you want to say something?
I would just.
I think Director Barajas has
I may.
something to add.
Mr. Chair, we do track that for LHIA because local match is required for all of those projects. And there is, leveraged dollar amounts as part of TBRA. They're a part of that. Not as specifically in LCDA, but it's something that we can look into. But I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, if I
Ms.
may
Berke.
add, I think in terms of looking at overall how much a community is investing in affordable housing or other goals versus how much is coming from LCA and like what is the proportionality, I think that would be a really interesting question. I think that fits really well with the proposal we included in our business item today in the presentation, that we intend to evaluate our place in the funding ecosystem and understand it better, because we know although $27.5 million is a tremendous resource, it's also like just a drop in the bucket of affordable housing development financing, community development financing in our region. And so we're not as sure as we should be yet about how much of an effect we're having with those funds.
Thank you.
I remember what my other thing
Roll up,
was.
all right.
But the other thing was, I think it is important that we do these meetings, in this discussion, publicly, not through a work group that nobody, because I've been really frustrated not being a member of the work group and not being able to know what's going on until the last minute. And I think it would be important to have, Dakota County CDA and different people that are doing the construction of this stuff and the funding of this stuff with us discussing these things to make sure we get a variety of perspectives. Not necessarily through Metro Cities, although they are a wonderful organization. They don't represent every city in the Metro that's eligible for LCA programs. And so I don't want to miss out on the communities that have not chosen to be in Metro Cities, because they're some of the same communities that aren't doing LCA programs, but are doing affordable housing with other sources of funds.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
I'll pass.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Is the housing work group still doing its thing?
No.
No.
Not,
Oh,
not
Not
currently.
anymore. Not
okay.
anymore, but I mean, it was an open work group. Wendy, you did attend, I think, at one point, right?
Before the end of the year.
Right, we were
Sure,
kind
we
of
had to make-
termed out on the housing
We had to
work
make-
group.
What I
We were
thought.
established
Had to make
by-
sure we didn't have a quorum in those
Action,
meetings. And that was
right.
preventative of,
It ended at the
members
end
of
of
this body
2022,
participating.
so we'd have to reconstitute it to go forward.
I will say the transit policy work group is still meeting, so I miss housing policy work
I
group.
was just going to add on to that.
Yeah.
It seems like there's enough conversation here, enough to sink our teeth into, that maybe there's another group with your participation. I think you can make excellent points, maybe even participation from the Dakota County CDA, other public housing agencies, other folks that want to come back with a proposal. We move forward with this because we have to vote for something, all right? We don't have a Plan B thing to vote on. We have other ideas. Maybe it's weighted scoring. Maybe it's we throw the whole darn thing out the door and just put our money right towards allocating directly to the HRAs. Maybe that's the best way to go. I don't know. So that is my proposal or idea, that we move forward with this and that we bring a diverse group of folks for one meeting, 3 meetings, whatever it takes to come back with a proposal that folks think is heading in the right direction.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is that a motion to approve?
Not quite yet.
Okay, all right.
That is a motion, that is a idea to
Yeah,
discuss.
yeah. That's deep. All right. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf, then Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to answer Councilmember Chambliss's question about being able to participate. I was told that I could listen in on one of the meetings, but I wasn't supposed to talk because that would violate the open meeting law because we'd have a quorum in something. And I had asked to be on the group, but I was not chosen to be on the group, and I didn't know when the meetings were and didn't have the opportunity to view them later or anything. I pestered on a couple of things, but in terms of having the ability to be an active participant in the discussion, those of us that were not in the housing work group were not allowed to do that without violating the open meeting law.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss.
I'd like to make a motion to approve
Yeah.
item 2023-48.
Right. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. So the motion is before us. Discussion, I mean, clearly, there's this issue of geographic equity that we need to address. I feel like we need to really sharpen our pencils. This is going to be an interesting conversation because I think it'll raise issues of, are we one metro area? How do we, population, the population of Dakota County is the same as the city of Minneapolis, although it's 10 times that square mileage. So it's different, right? Is it demographics? Is it income? And if we want to get into this kind of detail, I think that's great. That's what we should do, and we can figure out the mechanisms. If the housing work group isn't the appropriate one, maybe it's specific work group to the LCA funds. And this has come up enough in my, 20 years in public life, this geographic equity question in a number of funding streams. So let's do it. But I agree with Councilmember Lindstrom. I think we need to approve this today and move forward with a commitment to have this transparent conversation about how we address this geographic equity question going forward. So I'm supportive of the motion today and supportive of going forward with a new conversation.
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnson,
I'd like to make an amendment,
and what?
the main motion, and that would be that this committee be pulled together in a work group setting, not less than 1 times, possibly up to 3, to discuss exactly what we've talked about. And the reason I'm doing that is we don't know who will be appointed.
Right.
And so for those of us who are really wanting more discussion, I'm just attaching it to this as an amendment to say that this group will, in whatever form we find ourselves in a month from now, because we'll have new people, and I just think it's worthy of setting a course of at least 1 meeting. I think we'll need more. And that's a long amendment to the motion, but I'm just
Can you
restating, I think, what
state
I've
it?
heard and making it part of the main motion.
Yeah, can you restate that in a more terse way?
Yes, I will. Mr. Chair, I would make an amendment that the Community Development Committee meets in a work session group not less than 2 times within the next 6 months, where we can discuss this issue about geographic equity and other items.
LCDA.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need to be a little specific here.
Yes,
otherwise-
LCDA, TOD.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks. Discussion on the motion to amend. Director Barajas.
Discussion, but Mr. Chair, I would offer that we are actually have an information item at the end of our agenda on our work plan, and that is a perfect place for us to add to our work plan and adopt that for the year, even if that's not this group, but it can be something that we can do as part of our committee work plan here. If that would be amenable to you, I apologize.
No. So, yeah, I wasn't quite sure what you're suggesting. So to not pass this amendment, but rather to focus on the work plan, or they're parallel?
They're parallel.
Okay, perfect. That's what I
Yeah,
thought.
and Mr. Chair, I believe it would go on the work plan if it passed.
Yeah, great. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Just a clarification.
Yes.
Are you suggesting like 3 public meetings, whoever wants to come, whoever wants to put in their 2 cents, as opposed to like a work group of one appointed person from Dakota County CDA and one from Roseville, one from wherever, that type of approach? Or is this like 3 meetings of whoever wants to come can come to weigh in, or is this like 5 people will be appointed kind of thing?
If I may, before I make Councilmember Johnson,
Chair.
yeah, so the motion was no less than 2, so we haven't set on 3 meetings, and I think really the form and format is to be determined, right? But I think the point is that they'd be public meetings, right? Because if
That's
all
good
of
enough
us
for
are
me.
included, yeah, it's got to be a public meeting.
Great.
Cool? Does that, Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Perfect, cool. Further discussion on the motion to amend? Seeing none, all in approval of the motion to amend, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? That carries. So we have that as amended. We have the motion before us to, as amended, that the Metropolitan Council approve the 2023 Livable Communities Act Distribution Fund Plan as shown in attachment 1, and then with the amendment. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. 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 Opposed? And that carries. Thank you, committee members. And we will return to the agenda, the order of the agenda. So what's on the non-consent business item is item 1, which is 2023-32, the 2050 Regional Development Guide Community Designations. And Raya Esmaeili is here to present. Welcome, Mrs. Esmaeili.
Hello.
Esmaeili. Hello.
Everybody. Okay. I should probably introduce myself again. I'm Raya Esmaeili. I'm a planning analyst in the local planning assistance unit, and here today to talk to you about the 2050 community designations, or the proposal for the community designations. Councilmember Wolf can probably make this presentation instead of me. She's heard it so many times. So the project, and you have heard this before in a couple of your meetings in 2022, the project started in early 2022 to update the current community designations that are in Thrive 2040 MSB, which is this one, the map that is on the cover. So the project basically, the project started because community designations are an important aspect of the regional policies, since a lot of our policies, specifically land use policies, are based on community designation. It was a very iterative process going back and forth between the Land Use Advisory Committee, and we had internal and external focus groups. We presented to the Metropolitan Council as a whole, as well as Community Development Committee, and received feedback, changed the information, and shared it again. So it just kind of continued like that throughout the process. The Land Use Advisory Committee was the main body that our project team was interacting with, since the Land Use Advisory Committee is the recommending body for community designations. But also, as I mentioned, we engaged with a group of internal staff, as well as an external group of local planners for the analysis part of this project, to determine the variables that will go into community designations, kind of evaluating how the previous round worked, how is it going to work this time, what should change, and all of the good questions. So then we developed some proposals with different variables until we determined the main variables, and then requested external feedback in an kind of a 30-day comment period that we shared this, information with all the communities, not just the focus groups that we had, and worked on those external feedback to modify the community designations and incorporate those feedback. So then, when was it? Last month, we finally went back to LUAC with this proposed designations. So this is, the map looks different, but really you have seen it before pretty much. Based on the external feedback that we received, we only changed a couple of communities designations from what LUAC and others had seen before. And one of the other components that we were bringing before LUAC was the naming of these designations within the MUSA, because now within MUSA we have 4 proposed designations, whereas in Thrive there are 5 designations. And I should note that most of the analysis was focused on areas within MUSA, because early on in the feedback process it was determined that areas outside of MUSA, there is a high desirability to leave those designations similar to how they are in Thrive.
And by similar, I mean just the geographic designations. At this point, we are not discussing policies yet. So that's why the areas that on this page you see as rural service area are exactly the same as are in Thrive. So the names are the same, the boundaries are the same, but the urban service area ones are slightly different. As I mentioned, there are 4. And we brought a couple of options to the LUAC to choose which naming conventions they would prefer. One was similar to Thrive, and the other one was slightly modified with the feedback that we had received about naming conventions in general. I should say that LUAC did not have a quorum last month. However, through discussion and consensus, this was what you see in front of you was the recommendation. But as I mentioned, LUAC was also involved in this whole process throughout the entire 2022. I think we were on the agenda every single time that you met in 20. Actually, sometimes we were the agenda.
Councilmember Wolf concurs.
Yes. So the map before you, just as a note, the variables that were included in the community designations, as you're seeing on this map, are the Metropolitan Urban Service Area as the determinant for the geography of where these variables were included. Then we have the age of housing as a proxy for age of infrastructure, as well as intersection density. Those are all similar to what they are in Thrive MSB 2040. And then the one change is using the planned residential density that are coming from the 2040 comp plans instead of what was in Thrive, the percent of developable land. So those are the variables that are currently have gone into this analysis, and the map before you is the proposed designations with the urban edge, suburban edge naming convention. I guess I'll just mention that after tonight, this will go to the Metropolitan Council next week, February 22nd, that will be included on the Metropolitan Council in order for this proposal to be considered as the official working draft for the remainder of the process of 2050 regional planning. So again, this is not an official recommendation for community designations. That will be part of the actual regional development guide and policy plans adoption as a whole. So currently before you is basically recommending the community designations as in the groupings, the names, and in your packet you'll also see some descriptions associated with these designations. You're not actually adopting those. Those are accompanying the map and the designations for an overall overview of what these designations are representing, and will be modified further and will be adopted officially as part of the regional development guide. And then after this work is done, we will move into some density analysis and land use policy discussion throughout 2023, and we will continue to work with LUAC on that. So, and I realize that, don't have that slide. So I'm going to go back to this. The proposed action before you is to officially recommend this proposed community designations, which is option 2 that was presented to LUAC as a working document for the regional planning process for the adoption to Metropolitan Council. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Esmaeili, for the report. And I would note that Councilmember Chambas needed to leave to attend a Brooklyn Park City Council meeting where she is attending a presentation there. So just to note that. Committee members, questions or discussion on the report? Any discussion? I think it's kind of easy since we're not really approving the community designation, so not quite so much discussion. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment, when we worked on the name part, there was a lot of discomfort previously from the communities that are in the second tier that they were called urban, and the the top tier was urban core, because they didn't feel urban. So that's why we went with the urban and urban edge and suburban and suburban edge. I think it's easier to understand, and it also acknowledges the feelings of the communities that were in that second tier before. And with that, I would move approval.
Thank you for that insight and for the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, Mrs. Esmaeili. We'll move into the next non-consent business item, which is 2023-46, Norwood Young America Industrial Park Expansion Comprehensive Plan. And Mrs. Esmaeili will present that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll skip the introduction. Let's wait for this. Okay, perfect. Before you is an amendment from the City of Norwood Young America that's called Industrial Park Expansion. The amendment includes a site that's about 92 acres. The proposal is to change the land use designation of this site from medium density residential, which allows for densities of 8 to 12 units per acre, to industrial. And also expand the MUSA line to include the entirety of the site, because part of the site is out. But also the reason for this amendment is that they want to expand an existing industrial park that is just north of the site. So this is, and the general location is south of Tacoma Boulevard and west of Tacoma Avenue, which I doubt that everybody will know exactly where that is, but you'll see right now. There you go. This map, which is also, I believe, figure 2 of your staff report, shows the location of the site with respect to the regional systems. As you can see, the site is not close to any part of the regional system, and the closest component is a regional trail search corridor. This map shows the community designation of the site. The entire City of Norwood Young America, including this site, is designated as rural center. And as a rural center community, they have to meet a minimum density of 3 to 5 units per acre. This is the existing or current planned land use, so that shows that medium density residential land use designation that the site currently has, and then it's gonna be industrial, and this is a proposed land use map. The planned residential density shown here in Table 1 of the PowerPoint, which is also included in the staff report, shows that the change in this land use designation will bring down the overall density of the city from 2.92 to 1.98. You had seen an amendment from City of Norwood Young America in, I believe, end of summer of 2022 or sometimes around that time, that came before you because of being inconsistent with land use policies. And that's when the overall density fell below 3 units an acre. So with this amendment, they're decreasing it further. I do want to note that the city, we have been in conversation with the city and their consultants, and they're aware of how a lot of the higher density land is either being re-guided to non-residential or very low density residential, and they are working on redoing their future land use map and rethinking about areas that can accommodate that minimum density requirement, basically. So the findings of this amendment is that the proposed amendment conforms to the regional system plans, is consistent with water resources management policies, is consistent with council forecast. It is inconsistent with regional land use policies in Thrive MSP 2040. It also is inconsistent with the housing policy plan, because at this point, with this reduction, the city does not have enough land guided to address its affordable housing need. And the proposed amendment is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. So with that, the proposed action before you is to authorize the city to place this comprehensive plan amendment into effect and find that the amendment does not change the city's forecast, but also find that the amendment renders the city's comp plan inconsistent with the council housing policy, and the city is therefore ineligible to participate in LCA programs. And also, we're advising the city to be consistent with council policy. The city will need to increase the inventory of land guided to support the development of low and moderate income housing for the 2021-2030 decade by at least 160 units by guiding enough residential acres at sufficient minimum densities. Sorry. Yeah. And also, we have a couple of advisory comments. So we're advising the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecast and land use. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Esmaeili. Discussion on that report? Any discussion? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the Norwood Young America Industrial Park expansion.
Move approval.
Thank you, Councilmembers.
Handling Deb Barber today.
Oh, thank you. Good job. Second, thank you, Councilmember Lee. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, Mrs. Esmaeili. We'll move on to our final non-consent business item for the evening. It's item 2023-35. This is being heard in joint committees. It's the 2023 budget amendment. It's our carry-forward amendment. And Zandy Iverson is here to present. Ms. Iverson, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is Zandy Iverson, and I'm a principal financial analyst with Community Development.
Thanks. Is this the first time you've presented at committee here, Ms.?
At this, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
welcome. Very nice.
So this business item is the 2023 carry forward budget amendment. We are requesting to carry forward, or we are requesting to amend both the Community Development's operating and capital budgets. First, I'll start with the operating budget side, and this is the 2023 budget that we are amending. We are requesting to carry forward just over $1.4 million for two projects that were started in 2022 and included in the 2022 budget, but all of the funds were not expended by the end of the year. One of those projects is $1.4 million to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, and the other is $60,000 for the Climate Action and Resilience Plan. As background, these projects, like I said before, were programmed in 2022 and part of that budget, but were not fully expended by the end of the year and basically built reserves at the end of 22. So what we want to do here is just program these funds into 2023 so these projects can be completed. On the capital side, we are requesting to transfer $250,000 of Family Affordable Housing Program, or FOP, operating fund reserves into the HRA capitalized or authorized capital program. This transfer was planned in the 2023 Capital Improvement Program, or CIP. These funds will be used in the HRA capital program for large maintenance and improvement projects. So an example of that would be replacing all of the windows in a house versus replacing just one window, or doing roofs on our council-owned property. The funds that are used for the capital program come out of the FOP operating reserves, and as a reminder, FOP income is funded by rents that we receive for the housing. So lastly, we also have one really small administrative adjustment. As a reminder, these are just included for transparency. There's no action you need to take on them in the capital program, but it was just a small moving money from one project to another. So this budget amendment supports the Thrive outcome of sustainability by preserving affordable rental housing and supporting climate change planning. The requested action tonight is that the council authorize the 2023 unified budget as indicated and in accordance with the attached tables. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very, very much, Ms. Iverson. Questions on that report? Questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the 2023 carry forward amendment.
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Iverson. And our final item on our agenda is information item. It's 2023 Community Development Committee Work Plan. Director Barajas will present. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. I'm happy to be before you tonight to talk about this year's work plan. As you might recall, we usually do this in a two-part series, information for discussion, and then coming back to you for adoption for our annual work plan. I've already made note of the LCA discussion that we already had today to include that as part of your work plan when I bring this back to you. We're happy to do that. When I come back to you later this month, it will also include a schedule to include with that. But what you'll see in the document today are, starting at the bottom of the page, our regular business items that you'll see scheduled throughout. It's kind of our core calendar, what we have to accomplish throughout the year. And then that follows on to page 2. At the bottom of page 2 is where you see a heading called 2023 Initiatives. And I think, as Councilmember Wolf is familiar, these are going to be very similar to what LUEC has as well. Most of our initiatives this year are going to be related to our regional planning work and continuing those discussions, community designations, land use policies, getting into the details of regional parks and trails planning, our housing policy discussions, a number of different, as you can see, the list is long here, a number of different activities that relate to the 2050 development guide. Now, some of that might work its way up to committee of the whole discussion. Some of that might be here as well, but we do want you to know that that's certainly a part of this division's work and our staff team's work. Whether those move here or there, things we're still trying to kind of hammer out, but certainly the direction from this body and guidance from this body to the bodies we work with, like LUEC and the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, are very helpful and much needed as we work with those two bodies on developing additional information. So as I bring this discussion to you as well, you know, I have some three main questions, like, are there specific areas of policy outside of the 2050 process or something you don't see on here already that you would like to discuss and clarify? I have, of course, made note of the LCA discussion. Are there additional information or reports or analysis that you would seek that would better inform your work, that helps us plan our staff time and be sure we're bringing appropriate information to you? And then, of course, if there are other speakers, panels, or perspectives that you would like to hear, we can certainly organize that as part of informing your policy discussions over the course of this year. So again, those discussions for your consideration, draft work plan in front of you here, and I would welcome your feedback and input.
Thank you, Director Barajas. Discussion on that presentation and on the Community Development Committee work plan for this year. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this great work always, and appreciate the concise list. One thing that I'm curious about, you know, I attended with Chair Zelli the Itasca projects work groups release of their housing report, which I think got waylaid a little bit during COVID. I know I was tracking very closely with the work that they were doing when I was at Prosperity's front door, because in that work that I was doing, we were putting a scorecard out against the Dayton's Housing Task Force goals, and just kind of trying to figure out, because we're such a rich source of data here, and I know we've informed a lot, of course, around the regions, whoever's doing reports on whatever, we're kind of the go-to source. But how can we integrate with the new goals now that have been established by the Itasca project? So they're really claiming that this is for the entire region. I think it probably, they referenced, of course, to our regional economic development framework, with the 9 points around that, and equity is woven into all of that. So how can, in our work, how can we show up, whether it be, I think maybe to Sarah's point earlier, the 27 million that we're putting in is maybe a drop in the bucket, but how are we moving the needle, and or how are we participating in the impact, or are we gonna help everybody else figure out how the impact is coming along? You know, that's what I'm trying to figure out, because all of this is really good work. We know that we see some results. We're very good at measuring things, but there's this big hunger out there to figure out, are we getting to where we need to go? So I'm just wondering what our role is in that here at the council in our work, and then outside with our partners, and where that fits into our plans for the coming year and beyond.
Thank you. Director Barajas.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, that's a really great question. And as the Itasca project was working on developing those goals, our staff did coordinate quite a bit with them on what the source of the data should be, how they can create a goal that recognizes both the affordability and the production need. That gets us sort of, if you will, back on track from being behind. And so I know that they were very cognizant of not trying to create a goal that would be different or use a different base sort of data. So behind the scenes, a lot of staff coordination there and using similar data. So what you will see, you won't see that in our work per se, it's just part of our staff partnerships across the region. But as we move into our housing policy work, well, even at a higher level, as we start at the our regional forecast and then the allocation of forecasts to local governments or local jurisdictions across the region, and then also begin having our conversations about what the existing need for affordable housing is moving into the next decade. So right now, the 2040 plan is for the decade of 2021 to 2030. I know, clear as mud, easy to keep straight, but the 2050 plan will focus that affordable housing need for the next decade, so 2031 to 2040. And as part of our conversations, we'll talk about the existing need, the existing unmet need in the region, what that might look like for the next decade, and developing affordable housing need allocations for that next decade. So both the existing decade and the next decade going forward as part of the 2050 process. So certainly a big part of the conversation that I, neatly summarized as housing policy on this list, but does a great disservice to the amount of work that goes into doing the analysis and preparing for the conversations here. That will include studies, reports from our staff, potentially others that we bring into the conversation about where we're at today and where we need to go going forward.
Mr. Chair?
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. I mean, I knew that the council was a great source of data and research, but I really have come to appreciate it much, much more since I've been a council member. So will your team continue to work with McKinsey, and will your team continue to work with Greater MSP and probably Center for Economic Inclusion because of the framework, so that we, the need is great and we can state the need and we can state how we plan to get there, but it's really in the nitty-gritty that we deal with. They don't deal with that, but we deal with that. So great for the 2050 plan to get that far out. You gotta put it out there somehow, but we're in Thrive 2040, so how are we adjusting to what the people that wrote Thrive before we got here, how I'm trying to, I guess, come up with something that's more of a living document with data that can be interpreted year over year, or at least every other year, to help us to really state the case of, are we making progress? Aren't we? Where are we making progress? Where aren't we? All of that. So is that part of you'll continue to work with those entities? Is that what I'm hearing?
Thank you. Director Barajas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Johnson is correct.
And I think you were here, so sorry about that, Councilmember Welch.
Yes, we continue to work with other partners in the region, including all of those that you named, others that are also interested. A lot of, many of the communities in the region also have received ARP funding from the federal government that they're looking to put towards housing, so we work with them as well to help support their efforts. In addition to all of that, there must be something in the air today.
Yeah.
Just erased my brain. Annual reporting. We do continue to track affordable housing production. So that's your kind of checkpoint on where we're at, both our total development in the region as well as what's affordable each year. And that's something that we have been generally bringing to you kind of end of summer, early fall each calendar year. That builds off of our affordable housing production survey and our annual building permit survey as well. So you're getting those annual updates, and our staff are also looking at what those policy implications are, which is how we've been focusing on the 30% AMI and below, is because of what we've been seeing in production over those years. But certainly, that's our annual update and how we kind of keep our pulse on what's happening in the region and what's being produced or not being produced, and using that as a jumping point for where we might want to consider different priorities on a regular basis, in addition to cumulative, I can't say that word, all grouped together, what that might mean for, the 2050 process.
And Mr. Chair, just
Councilwoman
one
Johnson,
last point, if I may.
please.
And do we track in-migration to this region? Are we're tracking population? And the only reason I bring this up, and I'm looking at Peter, is that I was reading an article, and I can't remember where, but recently, that there's some anecdotal, if not solid data, showing that people are moving from water-scarce regions into Minnesota because we're water-rich. Now, I will say, that does not surprise me, because 20 years ago, when I was on the Plymouth City Council, our Park and Rec director had been to a national conference saying, the day is gonna come when they're gonna want our water. And we're hearing about that now, and it's changing the way people think. So while there's this hand-wringing about our population not increasing here, we're losing people to other parts of the country, I just find it fascinating to find out that there might be reasons that people are coming here that perhaps people hadn't thought of before. I don't want to open that whole discussion, but do we keep track of things like that as it relates to our planning as well?
Director
Mr.
Barajas.
Chair, Councilmember Johnson, excellent question. It's like you have our plan in mind as we're thinking about it. As part of our forecast development, the regional one in particular is where we're really looking at those big national trends and in some cases international trends like immigration that we see and are home to here in this region. Certainly, in migration, both from greater Minnesota and from other states are things we look at, as well as are people leaving this region. And that's something we both do on an annual update process, but as part of our 2050 process, looking at what the national forecast is for that and what portion this region would take of that. Now, I'm totally out of my realm of expertise. Todd Graham will be in front of you all later this year, I think in April, to give an update on the regional forecast trends and all of those different elements. Certainly, I was just at a conference in Phoenix last week, and they're really out of water talking about that there in the Colorado River Basin and what they're going to consider. And you've probably heard, especially if you've been up to Lake Superior anytime soon, a whole lot of desire to take some of that water and send it down there. And of course, folks not wanting to support that up there. Obviously, taking the water is a big thing. Moving here might be a little bit easier. So certainly those are the types of trends that we would be keeping an eye on as we're looking at our regional forecast, what the how large of an increase we might see as part of that, how we build our policies to be resilient for potential changes, whether it's from, immigration due to water shortages elsewhere, or even things like climate refugees coming from other places that might be hit by hurricanes, for example, where we have extended hurricane season in the southeastern part of this country. So certainly a lot of different factors, and those will be considerations that we'll have a lot of time to dig into over the coming year here.
Thank you. And again, I just want to thank you for all that. I think these are the fascinating things that the Met Council does that plenty of people know about, but not enough people know about. So, just figuring out how we do what we do and why and where we do it is critical to all of the work that you do. And I'm just pleased how hard you all must work. You're all way smarter than me, but I'm curious in the next, decade what's going to be happening, and we'll be figuring it out here before it does, so.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm glad you brought up that water issue. And I remember during my time on the Minneapolis City Council, it must have been during the Pawlenty administration here.
Yes.
There was the approval of what was called like the Great Lakes Accord or something, but the water agreements around the Great Lakes, which prompted me to do some reading about water rights. Of course, it all went to the Colorado River Basin or the West, and just how complicated and political that history of water rights is. And I thought, we're gonna face this here because we have the water and someday. So that is coming home to roost. So it's good to hear that we're thinking on it now. So I have in queue Councilmembers Lee and then Lindstrom. Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just want to point out that one of our greatest examples of the climate migrant is our very own George Gonzalez from the great state of Florida. And you know, going back to the whole watershed issue, at the leadership program that I run, one of our alumni, he's Native American, and he was 2 years ago appointed to this international water board that kind of straddles the U.S. and Canada. And so, yeah, our governments are taking the issue very seriously where climate and water usage is concerned.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I didn't think that there was one idea that could unite all Minnesotans until I heard the proposal from the corporation to build a pipeline down to Arizona or whatever it was, and it united all Minnesotans against it. Whatever your political, wherever you were at in the political spectrum, that ain't gonna happen ever. On a slightly different thought along the climate theme here, I wanted to update the committee on a conversation that took place this afternoon, which is super exciting and may be coming back before this committee in the next month or two. And that is something that we could add to the Metro HRA portion of this work plan. It's an idea called affordable solar. The idea here is we own 153 homes or townhomes. There is an organization in Minneapolis. It's been around for 15 years or so. It's a cooperative, kind of like a food co-op, except for renewable energy for low and moderate income residents. It's called Cooperative Energy Futures. And over the last year, just in Minneapolis, they started a program called Affordable Solar, which at their expense, they put solar arrays on apartments. Again, they fully cover it, and then those apartment owners enter into a contract called the Power Purchase Agreement for a set period of time where they pay a rate that's lower than what they are currently paying the utility. We're just started this conversation. It seems very interesting to put solar on some of the buildings that we own, the homes or the townhomes. So again, we started this conversation at 2 o'clock today. You know, it's brand spanking new. We didn't identify any sort of like, oh my gosh, barriers that completely put the brakes on it. So we're continuing the conversation. This needs to happen relatively quickly. So I think if it does happen, it would come back before this committee in the next month or so. That's it.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember, and for bringing up the Cooperative Energy Futures effort that organized kind of right around me when I was on Minneapolis City Council. Started in the Phillips area. It had got some energy from the, pardon the pun, some momentum from the renegotiation of the franchise agreement with the utilities, but it was really just a beautiful example of really grassroots interest that then partnered with the corporate interest, the utilities, and has really come to fruition. And so it's a good model, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
And if an important point I left out is that the residents of those homes get a discount of approximately 35 to 40% off their utility bill. Right. So it advances our climate agenda and advances our equity agenda as well. Agree.
Great example. Further discussion on the Community Development Committee work plan for 2023?
Mr. Chair, just
Councilmember
one question.
Johnson. Yeah.
It's related, but a little off topic, but related. So Director Barajas, how are you doing on getting a full complement of workers in community development? Because this is a lot. And I know we've had staff turnover and everybody's trying to find people. And I usually try to check in with every division when I'm bouncing around the council, but how's it going in community development?
Director Barajas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember
question.
Johnson, thank you for the question. We have a really smart, talented, and ambitious team, and I'm actually probably the wet blanket that's like, no, that seems like a lot. We should probably come, like, what can we reasonably do and make sure that we're spending, giving ourselves the space to explore, go back and rework, and come back and do this again. And also, especially in this year where we're coming into doing more public outreach and engagement around our policy work, making sure that we're having the time to spend building those relationships with our government partners and other stakeholders in the region, so that we have that time. So we are nearly full complement. We're in the business. We have a couple openings in HRA right now that are largely because of program expansion, and just a handful of vacancies in the rest of our regional planning division. So we're not in the dire straits that Metro Transit is, thankfully. I don't know how they manage it, but we are definitely in a really good position and are in the process, like many of our colleagues across the council, of hiring our intern class for the year as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Great question. Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the 2023 work plan? Further discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
I
Director
apologize.
Barajas.
I needed to thank all of you because last year for, in our discussions for our 2023 budget, you added, I think, 6 or 7 full-time equivalents to our CD budget, and those are largely the ones that are open and vacant right now because we're just starting to hire those, so that expands some of our teams so we can do all of this work that we were just talking about, especially in our regional planning department.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And Lisa, is there action on this ever, or this is, it's a living document? We can do great. Thanks. Councilmember Johnson.
Are we at the end of the agenda?
Yep, pretty much, yeah.
I need some more information too. So on February 8th, we have a listening session with Metro HRA as it relates to project-based vouchers. And that's also the same day as management's meeting. I'm not sure who else is meeting, then we end up in full council. So that's a virtual meeting, right? We can get online to get to that? Is that how that, the reason I'm asking is because I might have to have it on my hands-free while I'm driving to council that day, because I want to tune in.
Great,
Mr.
thanks.
Chair,
Director
And did
Barajas.
everybody get invited to that, I'm assuming? Okay.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, yes, that is a virtual meeting, I believe. I can double check. And you might recall Terry Smith and her team in the past couple of years have been holding listening sessions with affordable housing developers about project-based vouchers, what we might be considering, hearing from them as well. So while we would love for you to attend, we also want you to be safe. So please don't make, we will be reporting to what we hear from that, but certainly invite you to listen in as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that up.
And it is virtual,
Thank you.
12:30 on Wednesday.
Okay.
Cool. Anything else on the 2023 work plan, or anything else for the committee's interest here?
Well, I would just like to mention that our next meeting will be Tuesday, February 21st, due to the President's Day holiday.
Thank you, Michelle. Good reminder. And seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.